My Lai Massacre. On March 16, 1968, in the Vietnamese village of Sun Mai, U.S. soldiers carried out what became the single worst massacre of civilians by American forces in the 20th century. Between 347 and 504 unarmed villagers were slaughtered. Most were women, children, and elderly people. Many women and girls, some only 12 years old, were raped before being killed. Homes were burned, livestock was shot, and bodies were mutilated. Witnesses described mothers using their bodies to shield their children, only for soldiers to fire straight into them. One ditch alone contained more than 70 dead villagers. Soldiers went from hut to hut, killing entire families, bayoneting the wounded, and throwing grenades into shelters. Some soldiers refused to participate. One shot himself in the foot to avoid killing, and others, like Michael Bernhard, later helped expose the truth. The massacre would have been even worse if not for Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr. and his helicopter crew. Flying low, they saw civilians being executed. At one point, Thompson landed his helicopter between American soldiers and terrified villagers, ordering his own gunners to fire on U.S. troops if they continued killing. He rescued dozens of civilians by airlifting them to safety. Initially, the massacre was reported as a victory. The military falsely claimed 128 Viet Cong had been killed. Officers up the chain hid the truth. But when veterans spoke out and journalist Seymour Hersh investigated, the world saw photographs of murdered women, children, and babies piled in ditches. Out of 26 soldiers charged, only Lieutenant William Calley was convicted, for murdering 22 people. He was sentenced to life in prison but served only 3.5 years under house arrest, after President Nixon intervened. Most others walked free. Survivors carried the trauma for decades. One said, "Everyone in my family was killed. They threw me into a ditch full of bodies. I was covered with blood and brains." Haditha Massacre. On November 19, 2005, in the Iraqi town of Haditha, a roadside bomb destroyed a U.S. Marine convoy, killing 1 Marine and injuring 2. Within hours, what began as an attack turned into one of the darkest days of the Iraq War. 5 unarmed men were ordered out of a taxi and executed. Marines then stormed nearby homes. Inside were families with grandparents, parents, and children as young as 1 year old. By the end of the day, 25 unarmed civilians were dead, many shot at point-blank range. The official U.S. report was false. It claimed 15 civilians died from the roadside bomb and 8 insurgents died in a firefight. But Iraqi human rights workers filmed the scene: bullet holes in walls, blood on floors, and bodies of women and children killed by close-range gunfire. A Time magazine investigation proved none of the victims had bomb injuries, only gunshot wounds. A 9-year-old survivor said she watched her grandfather shot in the chest and then in the head, followed by her grandmother. 8 Marines were initially charged. But nearly every case collapsed. Some received immunity, others had charges dropped. After 6 years of legal battles, only 1 Marine was punished, and only for negligent dereliction of duty. He lost rank and pay, no jail time. For Iraqi families who lost multiple relatives in a single morning, the outcome felt like an insult. Survivors called it an assault on humanity. The U.S. military paid $38,000 to some families, a fraction of their loss. Samar Campaign, Kill Everyone Over 10. During the Filipino-American War, General Jacob H. Smith gave an infamous order: kill everyone over the age of 10. He wanted to turn the island of Samar into a howling wilderness. Months earlier, Filipino fighters had launched the Balangiga attack, killing 54 U.S. soldiers. In response, Smith ordered no prisoners to be taken and said anyone capable of bearing arms should be killed, defining that as boys as young as 10 years old. Major Littleton Waller, leading the Marines, partly resisted and told his men not to target women and children. But over just 11 days, his men burned 255 homes and killed at least 39 people. Entire towns and their food supplies were destroyed. Civilians starved or fled into the jungle. Estimates suggest 2,000 to 2,500 civilians were killed in the wider campaign. Public outrage erupted in the U.S. Smith was court-martialed, but not for murder, only for conduct prejudicial to good order. His punishment was a mild reprimand before he was quietly forced into retirement. Waller was later tried for executing Filipino porters but was acquitted.
Nisur Square Massacre, Blackwater. On a normal morning in September 2007, a Blackwater private security convoy entered Nisur Square in Baghdad. Within minutes, without warning, they opened fire on Iraqi civilians. 17 people were killed and 20 wounded. Some victims were shot sitting in their cars. Witnesses described a small Kia carrying a mother and her adult son. The son was shot in the head, the car rolled forward, and contractors riddled it with bullets before a grenade set it on fire. Blackwater claimed they were ambushed. Iraqi officials called it pure murder. A U.S. military report and FBI investigation later agreed. At least 14 of the 17 killings were unjustified. Some Blackwater guards themselves admitted the shooting was wrong. One guard continued firing even after being ordered to stop, until another contractor pointed his gun at him to force him to cease fire. Iraq suspended Blackwater's license and demanded accountability. Years later, 4 guards were convicted in U.S. federal court. 1 received life in prison. 3 got 30-year sentences, later reduced by about half. But in 2020, President Donald Trump pardoned all 4 men, triggering outrage from Iraq and condemnation from UN officials, who said the pardons violated international law. Abu Ghraib torture scandal. The photographs from Abu Ghraib are infamous worldwide, but the real story is even darker. Officially, it was a detention and interrogation facility. In reality, it became a site of systematic sexual humiliation, torture, abuse, and even killing. The detainee Manadel al-Jamadi died during interrogation. His body was packed in ice, and soldiers posed for photographs next to it. The Bush administration claimed these were isolated acts by rogue soldiers. But organizations like the Red Cross and Amnesty International reported widespread abuse across U.S. prisons in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo. Most detainees at Abu Ghraib were civilians with no ties to insurgents. Internal documents, later known as the torture memos, argued that Geneva Conventions didn't apply and approved harsh, enhanced interrogation techniques. Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez authorized the use of dogs, extreme temperatures, sleep deprivation, and sensory torture. Inside the cells, prisoners were stripped naked, threatened with dogs, beaten, chained in painful positions, deprived of sleep, and forced into degrading acts. One prisoner was sodomized with a chemical light. Others had acid poured on them or were dragged by ropes tied to their genitals. Manadel al-Jamadi's death was ruled homicide, but no one was charged. 36 detainees died from insurgent mortar attacks on the prison, itself a violation of Geneva rules forbidding prisoners to be held in active combat zones. In 2006, the Supreme Court ruled that Geneva protections did apply. 17 soldiers and officers were removed. 11 faced courts-martial. Punishments ranged from reprimands to 10-year sentences. External contractors such as CACI were also implicated. In 2024, a U.S. jury found CACI liable for conspiring with military police to abuse detainees, awarding $42 million in damages to survivors. Operation Speedy Express. Operation Speedy Express, December 1968 to May 1969, was one of the deadliest campaigns of the Vietnam War. Officially, U.S. forces claimed 11,000 enemy kills, yet recovered only 750 weapons. This meant thousands of the dead were likely civilians. Major General Julian Ewell's strategy relied on overwhelming firepower. Helicopter gunships, artillery barges, and fighter bombers in one of Vietnam's most densely populated regions, turning entire areas into free-fire zones. The U.S. Army's own Inspector General later estimated 5,000 to 7,000 civilians were killed. Decorated Commander David Hackworth admitted, "A lot of innocent civilians got slaughtered because of the drive to have the highest body count." Villagers described entire communities wiped out. Civilians running for safety were shot from the air. A Viet Cong commander explained, "Most of the people killed were civilians because civilians ran. We soldiers held our ground." In 1972, Newsweek published a major investigation showing that 3/4 of civilian wounds in local hospitals came from U.S. firepower. Their conclusion: thousands of civilians had died, but the story was overshadowed by the My Lai scandal and received far less attention. History is full of stories we'd rather forget, but forgetting them guarantees they happen again. Thank you for watching. Stay aware, stay informed. I'll see you in the next video.